بخير وكويسين. اوكي. كنت بقول يعني مساء الخير عليكم، يا رب كلكم تكونوا كويسين وبخير. انا سعيده جدا جدا باللقاء الاقليمي اللي يعتبر متواصل، لان احنا كنا عاملين اجتماع في لبنان، اجتماع تحضيري للسيشن ديت. فخليني بس ابدا بشكل سريع عن مقدمه للسيشن بتاعتنا in English عشان الناس اللي لسه داخله، وبعد كده ننبه عليهم يعني ان في ترجمه موجودة عندنا. فخليني أبدأ المقدمة الأول باللغة الإنجليزية، وبعد كده إحنا هنبتدي كل السيشن بتاعتنا إن شاء الله.
Arabic to have all the sessions in
good evening everyone. I am ياسمين.
مرحبا جميعا، أنا ياسمين علاء الدين من مصر، وأنا سأكون ميسرة هذه الجلسة. هذه الجلسة هي حول نشاطات فعاليات لجنة وضع المرأة
CSW. It aims to present and discuss national and international feminist policies with a focus on countries where women are suffering more and more due to regional conflicts and tensions. Please click on the button. Don't know this, please contact the Nazra team. برحب بكم مرة تانية النسوية بالتعاون مع
Greetings everyone. This is a cooperation between Nazra for Feminist Studies and the Collective for Research and Training on Development Actions, and this is in the theme of the CSW 66 round. This meeting aims to present and discuss the feminist policies on the national level with a focus on the countries where women suffer continuously because of tensions and conflicts on the regional level. Let me please welcome all the feminist activists that will be with us today as speakers. Mrs. Bushra Belhaj from Tunisia, who is a parliamentarian activist, Dr. Balqis Abu Usba from Yemen, and the professor of political studies. She's a professor of political studies in Yemen. We also have Mrs. Amal Kabashi from the network of Iraqi women. And last but not least, we have Mrs. Sulaima Sharif from Sudan, the Director General of an organization fighting against the oppression against women. I remind you that today we have 3 rounds of discussion. In the first round, we talk about the situation of women currently in the MENA region. And then we will be discussing the challenges on the level of the different countries and the findings of the preparatory meeting that we have done in Lebanon. And last but not least, we will open the discussion for a Q&A session for the participants to ask questions. Let me start by saying that we are providing an overview on the current situation of women in the MENA region. And this is certainly to highlight and shed light on the findings from the different countries in the region, and then we'll be talking with the participants from the different countries in the region about about the conditions. We are mainly talking about the conditions of women amid COVID-19 and how the rates of violence against women is exacerbating amid this situation, and how the national efforts are able to combat such circumstances in countries where conflicts exist, as well as countries that are not amid conflicts. And this is also in secondary themes, but the most important thing is to reach a point where we can deal with the political and economic and social developments and adopt policies accordingly. There are other things that we also reached as a result of the meetings about the conditions of women in the region, focusing on the national strategies and the implementation of the Decision 1325 and fighting gender-based violence. And when we had strategies on the national level to implement this decision, they were always unsuccessful because of how the countries were not implementing them and were avoiding such implementation in the right way. In addition to the different transitional justice paths and the challenges they face. And these are topics that the speakers will be talking about, in addition to excluding women from peace building processes. And last but not least, we will be talking about some international organizations and how they implement foreign policies when it comes to feminist issues in a way that does not really go hand in hand with the national policies. So we will be talking about 5 countries where we need to really shed light on the conditions of women in the MENA region. We will also delve deeper into the conditions of each country. So now I give the floor to Mrs. Bushra to talk about the conditions in Tunisia amid COVID-19 and the political developments. So Dr. Bushra, are you interested in talking now? Thank you so much. You actually wanted me to be the first intervenant. It was not part of my schedule, but let's do that. Let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a consensus or a common reality among the different countries in the MENA region. Despite the different levels of development in each, the common element is how COVID-19 ensured again the vulnerability of women and deepened the challenges they face, as well as decreased their empowerment. Because after women were perceiving that the 99.5% 99.5% of women were saying that they were they want to reach social justice. This rate was really increased to over 100 by over 25% of years. So the women are waiting a lot to reach social justice, and this rate of expectation of years has increased amid COVID-19. The issue of violence against women has really doubled and increased amid the pandemic, and based on the figures that were issued by the Ministry of Women in Tunisia, the rate of violence against women has increased 7 times compared to pre-COVID-19. And this has really showed that there are no preventive policies that are clear and that are set by the countries, especially our countries, the Arab world in particular. And it also showed clearly that the civil society organizations, despite their limited capacities and despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the interventions of the civil society organizations, the civil society organizations were the main party, the main ones talking about women's rights and helping and assisting women on the level of health, on the level of social safety and protection. Although we know that in Tunisia today, we don't have a lot of preventative centers, and however, there's this policy that was voted on in 2017 on violence against women, and that really it shows how the state should abide by protecting women from emotional and physical violence. However, unfortunately, in certain times, I feel that as if this law that was voted on in a consensus and that was a pride for the Tunisian women and all women across the world, because the ranking was the fifth, its ranking was the fifth globally. It seems as if it was voted on by another country. After 2017, there's a feeling among a lot of feminist women as if we live in a different country. And we all know that we were in a democratic path that was not the best or the most ideal, not the one that we dream of, be it on the level of the democratic path or on the level of socioeconomic levels or the financial and environmental levels. There is a feeling of disappointment because 10 years after the revolution in Tunisia, the conditions are not as the Tunisians who have dreamt for. And the state in Tunisia did not really face the main challenges and needs of the people, but we feel that there's a dynamic in reality. There's an excess by the civil society organizations work. After the revolution, there was a fear from the effect of the revolution and stuff, but that did not prevent the Tunisian state and continuing in its feminist policies. So all over 50 years, we were addressing the feminism of the state because we considered it as patriarchy and it wanted to control the issue of women and the struggle of women. And we established a feminist movement to tell the state that the struggle of women is not only the struggle of the state, but the struggle of all women and the society. But after 2017, we felt that as if the state has really left all its responsibility on this. First of all, we felt that there is no real activation for the content of the law. For example, the law on violence against women, from the approach that the Tunisian state adopts, it should be building policies and not only on women, but not only the Ministry of Women, but all other ministries, for example, the Ministry of Education, to include the sex education in the curriculum, the Ministry of Social Affairs to include women who are victims of violence on the level of the society. There's an educational impact. There's a need from all the different ministries to really work. And it's a project by the state to head into more equality, considering that it is the main source of violence. We saw that all forms of violence were accumulated without really clear policies. In addition to that, in the ministry, in the parliament, there was a vote on the importance of taking into consideration equality and justice and the non-discrimination against women through opportunities between men and women and between the different categories of the society. When putting the budgets of the state, there's a law on the budget that implies on the state and all the ministries to ensure special measures and prerogatives to decrease the discrimination and inequality between men and women in Tunisia. However, we see that there are some special policies. However, unfortunately, after the 25th of July, there is a monopoly by the president of the state of all the legislative and executive powers in Tunisia, regardless of the scene that is now dominating and that we dreamt of. what happened is that there is a total absence of feminist policies and women's rights policies in Tunisia. For the first time in the history of Tunisia, even back in the era of oppression, in the past regime, it was oppressive on the level of rights, but it had some responsibilities that it was talking about and putting legislations on. There was a president of the state present in all ceremonies, providing suggestions and proposals for reforms. And in certain cases, there were reforms that not on the level that is always needed, but there were some reforms back then on different levels and different impacts. However, today, on the level of legislations, there is a need to admit that all these accumulations on the level of legislations throughout 60 years, we are still considering it as the basis of the Tunisian society. But I don't consider them as an exception. It was a unique experience, if I may say. It was progressive and much more developed than the other Arab countries. However, this experience today lives in a stagnation phase, and stagnation is not something that we like, because when developments don't occur as what has happened in the last 60 years, and when there is no rhetoric that can be pro women's rights. For example, the current president, when he only talked about women's rights for once, he mentioned on Women's Day, on International Women's Day, he could have really provided some reforms or proposals for reforms, but all he did is going to the public opinion and saying that he is against equality because he considers that the text in the law cannot be changed, and he seems to be changed into a religious figure instead of a president. Second of all, most often the state and the president try to make conflicts among women themselves. For example, he talks about women in the rural sectors and rural areas who are part and parcel of all the Tunisian women, and they should not be differentiated from the other women in the other regions in Tunisia. The feminist movement is the first movement that talked about the reality of women on the conditions of labor and work, and on the discrimination in terms of pay, because the pay for women was half that of men. The feminist movement is the movement that brought all these topics on the table. And however, the president of Tunisia wanted and preferred to put the feminist and intellectual women in Tunisia in a different category than the different women in Tunisia, as if we are the bourgeois and they are the other category that is lower. Unfortunately, we do not know for how long this is going to keep on going on, but we know for sure today that we can perceive that feminism is a feminism of a nation. It is about a meeting, an encounter among women between the feminist movement and the state itself. I think you all know really well the Committee of Individual Rights and Equality that was previously present in Tunisia, and which proposed a collective of legal reforms to end discrimination completely, and gender discrimination, and including, for example, equality on terms of hereditary issues. However, this is not the case today. Previously, there were so many proposals for reforms to reach equality. In that phase of time, we felt that this division between women who are independent and part of the civil society and that were maybe in conflict with the feminists of the state, we felt that we will reach at some point feminism of the nation, of the country, to achieve gender equality. However, today, unfortunately, we feel that there are steps backwards, and we hope when we seek and we struggle to bring back the issue of women's rights and gender equality to the table, to the forefront, and to end violence and to implement policies on ending violence in the ground. We do not lose hope, but I cannot consider that this is a phase that is exceptional in a positive way. It is an exceptional phase, and the president in Tunisia considers that exceptional phases implies exceptional measures. And I think when we talk about exceptional measures, we need to talk about COVID-19 and about measures that help women. Today, we see that there are no special measures, although in the government before 2019, there were some measures. For example, there was an important measure on the level of laws related to the distribution of lands of the state. There was a quota for women to empower a percentage of women and give them some of the lands of the state. This was a theme that was proposed, and also the sex education in Tunisia was also part of the reform proposals. However, today, this is not the case. So maybe the steps that were taken in the last few years, regardless of the political deadlock and the political difficulties that we passed through after the revolution, unfortunately, there is a decline in terms of the advantages that we reached in the last years, and there are no interventions or initiatives by the state currently. The only initiative by the state that was proposed is very negative, and it's on the level of households. And I think it's about mediation. It's about mediation within a household to alleviate violence against women. And I think this is very negative and bad. And if they want to really provide excuses for it and explanations, I do not think that they are logical. All women around the world live social pressures and household pressures and patriarchal pressures. To conclude, without further ado, Tunisia and Tunisian women for tens and tens and years were present and were always ready not only to preserve their rights, but also to be granted new rights, to lower the gap between men and women and the disparities. And the civil society, since it's really ready and present, and since women in Tunisia are really holding tight to their rights, I will still be optimistic, and I consider that all women will be achieving a lot of gains. Thank you. So no one is currently speaking. Yasmin.
تفضلي يا ياسمين.
Yasmin, the floor is yours. Sorry, but Yasmin is facing some technical difficulties with the internet, so we will now move to Mrs. Amal Kabash. Well, I'm with you right now. Yasmin is the second speaker today with us.
اوكي
We were talking earlier. I'm sorry, I had some technical difficulties. We were talking about the total absence of rhetoric and policies that protect women and feminists. Now we have Mrs. Amal Kabashi from Iraq. The floor is yours, Mrs. Amal Kabashi.
مرحبا.
Greetings, everyone.
مرحبا جميعا.
Hello, everyone. Shall I start? Yes, we can hear you well. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
تحية جميع من بغداد في هذا النهار.
Greetings to everyone from Baghdad in this really nice weather of spring. This is Amal Kabashi from a network of women in Iraq. I'll be talking about what Iraqi women face amid the COVID-19 preventative measures and the lockdown measures that we passed through. They affected the reality of women and how they fight for their rights. In the last couple of years, women in Iraq were trying their best to reach peace and protection from violence. In addition, women human rights defenders and feminist activists were subject to the threat. We cannot hear you well. The voice is cutting off. In 2019 and 2020, a lot of crimes happened and they were gone without a punishment. So they had impunity, and there were a lot of risks, and the different forms of violence were exacerbated. And the law was almost inexisting. I will be talking about three main issues on the status of women in Iraq and what could be addressed, and some recommendations to address them. First of all, the elections. For sure, we have witnessed elections earlier in 2021 in November. The elections were a result of the populist revolution by the people, and the government had to impose during early elections in 2021 the results of the elections for women in general were great because they led to more than 65% of women to be in the government. As part of 329 seats in total, there was 65% of women, which means that there is a desire in general by the Iraqis to have women in decision-making processes and political processes. And this also imposes on decision makers and the Iraqi state to look into it and to have to provide a role for women as main partners in the parliament, and also a leading role in the negotiations for the formation of the government, and to have more women in leadership positions. And all of this should be under the constitution and under the principles of equal opportunities. I hope the government would look into this. However, unfortunately, until now, the women are semi-absent from the formation of the government processes, and they could not really be any active in the parliament. The second issue that we need to focus on is certainly the fact that access of women to the parliament is very important. However, these women and the feminist society in Iraq need more empowering tools or processes and programs that may lead to alleviating the percentage and the rate of violence against women and discrimination against women. As we all know, among civil society organizations that are feminist, there is a campaign that has been going for years and years, demanding, activating the law that criminalizes violence in the household and domestic violence. However, this law has not been implemented yet, and there's a strong opposition against this law in the parliament, as they think it threatens the patriarchal society and control. It threatens the control of men and the rule in the households. Although legislating this law is from the Constitution, the text 29 that says that the state needs to put an end to all forms of violence and discrimination on the level of the household and the school and the society. However, unfortunately, all the forms of violence are still happening amid the absence of the law and amid the absence of the protective tools that would allow women to reach more safe spaces and where they would receive more health care and rehabilitation. We can also highlight some advantages and positive points that happened during the last couple of years, among which the legislation of a law on the Yazidi women and the rehabilitation and protection. Although the law did not stipulate mechanisms for work that deals with raped women by ISIS and their children, and how to really put psychosocial support and rehabilitation support programs. However, in general, it's considered as a good step. And the law also provides financial remuneration as a compensation, which is also part of the transitional justice.
شكرا ليكي بقول شكرا لحضرتك يا أستاذ أمل. إحنا ممكن نتطرق للحاجات دي في بعض.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Amal. I think we can really tackle these points in the national strategies that were taken in the Iraq on the level of women and girls. So among the most important themes that you were talking about is the exclusion of women and their non-empowerment in the political processes amid the increasing violence. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mrs. Amal. Now we will move to Dr. Bilqais from Yemen. And she will be talking about Yemen. Can I have 2 more minutes, please? Because you mentioned the political participation, I want to mention more on this level. The issue is related to the absence of a national framework that is feminist, as we still miss a mechanism on the level of women issues that would work under a comprehensive national strategies that would put an end to all the discrimination and would include women in the developmental issues. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mrs. Amal. Mrs. Balqis, please, if you can talk about the situation of women in Yemen. Hello, everyone. I'll be talking about the situation of women in Yemen amid the war and amid COVID-19. 7 years of war in Yemen have led to the worst humanitarian crisis based on international reports. This worst crisis has affected the Yemeni society in general, but also in particular, it affected women and children in Yemen. This crisis has led, and this war has led to a lot of killings and destruction of infrastructure, a lot of killings, a lot of violence, a lot of displacement and refugees. So the war that really destroys the country, destroys its people as well, but in particular, it destroys women. If we want to talk about the status of women amid this war, 7 years after the war, we can see that challenges faced by women include, first of all, the increase in violence against women. The rate of violence against women in Yemen was very high before the war, but it has increased amid the war, especially gender-based violence. And it also increased much more amid COVID-19 to a rate of 83% amid the absence of any mechanisms that would tackle this problem. And as a result of the war that happened in Yemen, the different rules taken by women were changed as a result of going to the war and fighting. Yemeni women are the heads of households for a lot of households, and this is something that the traditional society did not allow for, far from the local stereotypes. Now, it is part of the obligations of women to be breadwinners and to make ends meet and to head their households. And also this leads to a double violence in all cases. Also, as part of this, women would have to go to far places to bring water, to bring fuel and gas, and to make ends meet, which threatens them and puts them in harsh conditions and violence. The second point is the increase of poverty and starvation in Yemen. 7 years of war has led to an economic problem that is really, really devastating. The public sector in Yemen still does not receive its allowances, especially the health sector. And these two sectors are dominated by women workers. And this has led to an economic problem for women and children and dire poverty, leading to a 54% rate of poverty. The COVID-19 pandemic has also led to the exacerbation of this really dire condition and has led to a starvation in Yemen, a starvation crisis, especially after COVID-19 as a result of the closure and all the closures of the country and the stores. And there's a high rate of mortality and of women who died amid COVID-19. There was also oppression against women in the implementation of policies amid COVID-19 and the closure. When the stores were closed and when there was a lockdown, all these laws were implemented on women, but on men it was not the same. For example, the hairdressing for men were closed, but the hairdressing for men were open, but the hairdressing stores for women were closed. And this is a discrimination. On the level of education and health, 4 million children in Yemen now do not go to school because the schools are destroyed. They are used as places for storing arms. And we are now expecting a generation that would be illiterate if we cannot tackle all this. On the level of health amid COVID-19, most women did not receive enough health care, and also they were not really having access to reproductive health services. Amid COVID-19 as well, women were the most active in the civil society organizations. Amid COVID-19, a lot of women took initiatives in distributing masks and in doing awareness campaigns on the risks of COVID-19, because a lot of people did not really admit that COVID-19 exists to begin with, especially in the rural areas where they did not want to get vaccinated and they were not vaccinated. And as I tell you, this is one of the worst crises that Yemen has ever faced. The fourth point is the lack of political participation. The war has led to a big lack in the participation of women politically. After the war, a lot of feminist women have disappeared from the feminist scenery. A lot of women have started to make ends meet and look for bread and for working much more. And you know, the climate and the scenery and the lack of space for women to move has also affected them and has also affected their political participation. But there was a big role for the Yemeni women in peace building, regardless of all these challenges and risks. The Yemeni women have contributed to forming coalitions working on peace building. They were able to reach international platforms, the Security Council, to be vocal about the voices of the Yemeni women and Yemen. On the level of civil society, Yemeni women were having a big role despite their exclusion in the participation of political negotiations. Their participation is still limited, but the civil society and the international community and the rapporteur did not really play a good role in including them. And they always tackle those who are doing the conflict. However, there are still women who work in mediation, who work on freeing the disappeared and detainees, etc. But the main role of women is still absent as a whole. So, briefly, we are facing a humanitarian, economic, financial, and social and political crisis that women face in Yemen. But what really makes us happy is that during last week, two events are important and they happened in Yemen. The first event is the launching of the national strategy of the resolution number 1725. We still haven't really looked at it, but it was launched and issued. And I think we can pressure and lobby all together to implement this strategy. And the second thing is there was a campaign by women for access of Yemeni women to a passport, because Yemeni women do not have the right to take a passport without their the man responsible for them. But this condition was now let go, and now Yemeni women are able to get a passport and travel anywhere without the acceptance of a man for them. So war and COVID-19 affected women as such, as I said, and this was a brief about it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mrs. Balkis. Thank you, Day. Yasmin is facing some technical difficulties. Sulaima, please, the floor is yours now to talk about the situation of women in Sudan. Good evening, everyone, and happy March month, which is the month of women. It is the month where women would succeed and do what they want, and I hope the world becomes more friendly with women. I will be talking about Sudan on two levels. The first phase is the transitional phase before the December Revolution, the Great December Revolution, where the Sudanese women were very inspirational and inspired a lot of women around the world through their participation and big capacity in changing a dictatorship that lasted for 30 years. And after that, there was a transitional government after a political consensus. And it was part of the different transitions known around the world. And part of this transition was to provide some advantages for women. The transitional phase was difficult, and most governments were not lucky. We faced a lot of challenges in Sudan, and it was a vulnerable state and fragile state that was facing a lot of challenges and wars. COVID-19 was for Sudanese women in fighting the virus were really hard, especially the women who are in the non-formal sector. At the same time, the transitional government that came after the revolution wanted to do a lot of practices in terms of women's rights. We're trying to provide solutions. It succeeded at the first time to put a strategy and a few strategies to fight the pandemic and this health issue, and to be sensitive to the gender. But for the first time, we had some support. We had a support line for victims, women victims from violence, victims of violence. And we need to mention here that as part of the lockdown, women during that phase were subjected to a lot of physical and emotional violence and their lack of access to services. What was expected happened. The rates of domestic violence increased amid COVID-19, and the different forms of violence also increased, the other forms, but domestic violence was really high. And although there was a law on this, but practices of mutilation and surgery against the genital parts of women was also done. During a certain phase, such practices were really banned, but they were back amid COVID-19. And the new government wanted to have a new national strategy on the resolution 1525. The basics for it and the primary points were protection and to include gender issues in the different institutions in Sudan, to protect women, especially women in conflicts. And I think this is where we faced real challenges after the coup. The violence against the gender-based violence increased after the coup and amid the coup because of the absence of laws. The breaches against women were always there, but after 25 October revolution, the institutional responsibility was not there, and the rule of law was not there, and the violence that was mostly exercised was by the state apparatus, was exercised by state apparatus. And there was no protection of citizens. And this has caused a big danger on women. There was a lot of successes in the previous transitional phase, because even if that transitional phase did not provide the full protection, but it has provided some safe space in civil society, in the political parties, in the public space. Women had a safer space to discuss all these issues and to lift these issues in terms of changing laws and policies. And at the same time, there was a space for changing these laws and policies, and we had a draft of the first national law combating and fighting against violence against women. It was not implemented, but it was one of the achievements of Sudan in September, just right before the coup. It was a report that was submitted. So, although there are strategies, I need to say that there was a slowness and delay in providing a national mechanism for the resolution. And I think it could have been done better. We could have had a better strategy for this transition. The transition was really fragile, but the popular will of the people, and especially the Sudani women present in the streets, and because the Sudani women is is holding all the rights of women tight and working on them, be it on the level of protection issues or education issues or participation, political participation, social participation. All these issues are political issues that require a strong political will and thus require a democratic setting that helps and that would make these issues a priority. So the strategy needs to be present in the state, and there needs to be a commitment in it by the state. So the Sudanese women are really working hard to bring back democracy and to reach a democratic transition. And as they were always ensuring the end of a military regime, they are also working hard to reach a democratic regime. And they know how they are paying, and they know the risks that they are going through, and the oppression that they are going through, even on the political level. They are always the most vulnerable, and they are not always welcome to participate in the public space, but they try hard for that. Thank you so much, Sulaima. Based on what you guys have said, please, let's move now to the second phase of this discussion. If I may say, the second part of the panel discussion today is about the most important challenges that women face in the countries that are represented today in this discussion: Iraq, Yemen, Tunisia, and Sudan. We are talking about some of the challenges that we need to put recommendations about to tackle them. Let's start with Iraq. As Mrs. Amal was telling us and talking about the political situation that is really hard, and it's unable to be implemented in an inclusive way with an increase in the violence rate and the exclusion of women in the political space. So, Mrs. Amal, please, if you would be able to tell us more about the recommendations that you want to set and the main challenges that are faced by women on this level. And to highlight the recommendations needed. Mrs. Amal, the floor is yours. Of course, the challenges are many and diverse, but the most important challenge is the increase of gender-based violence and its threat and risk, and the absence of a law that puts an end to this law or that guarantees impunity. And also the spread of arms outside the state and armed actors, non-state armed actors that also feed into the conflict that is based on distributing quotas based on political interests. all of this is affecting women because the legal guarantees of these rights are really weak and are threatening. And as long as the political situation and security situation is fragile, the women are. Also, there's a need to follow up on the national policies. It's a challenge. There's a need to have the Iraqi government put forth a national council. There was and they formed it actually indeed for women, but it was not activated to date. And this reflects how women's issues are not a priority for the Iraqi government. In addition, there's a need to specify a budget for gender issues and women issues and empowering women. These were they were ratified, but they were not implemented. So there's a need for a serious action on this level and on activating all the resolutions and laws and policies that were adopted related to women's issues. Also, the second national plan related to the resolution number 1025 related to gender-based violence, they are still not activated or influencing in terms of practice and implementation. And there's a need for an administrative body that would follow up on the implementation of this plan. Also, the national plan, the strategy that would put an end to gender-based violence, although a lot of years have passed and it was extended till 2030, it was not activated, and there are no clear governmental plans to put an end to gender-based violence and violence against women. To the contrary, violence has increased and amplified, and we are seeing and witnessing the different forms of violence on social media. So there is a need for a legal protection against gender-based violence through setting laws and legislations on domestic violence with guarantees and safe spaces for women, and with criminalizing the concept of violence in law. All these things, we are still working on them, to activating them, and we are pressuring the government to legislate the law and implement it. The role of civil society organizations is still needing capacity building and reactivation. It's true that the current situation since 2003 opened the country for organizations, but it left the organizations fighting in the society in Iraq, and a lot of organizations started to close their doors because of a lack of financing and grants, and because of weak administrative structure. And thus the civil society space is decreasing. We need to expand civil society space, and we need a robust, strong civil society organizations that are fighting for women's rights. All the governmental bodies need mechanisms for follow-up, and also very active and efficient bodies that would work on the implementation and activation of laws and actions and practices. Last but not least, I think we need to have some indicators to measure our work and to measure the different policies. As feminist organizations, we need to measure all the different policies that are announced and launched in our countries in order to monitor the performance and to tackle the achievements on their levels, and to know the gaps between what has been done on the ground and what has been said theoretically. As a feminist movement regionally, we need to be in solidarity with each other, to cooperate, to coordinate among each other in all the different issues that are important to us, and that in this region that is fighting terrorism and extremism. We also need to deal with the spread of diseases. COVID-19 has proven to us the lack of the health sector's capacity to tackle the pandemic. a lot of the health sector infrastructures and equipments and capacities have proven their inefficiencies. In Iraq, there are only 3 or 4 hospitals in the war that were destroyed, and a lot of the patients have died because of that. So we need to provide capacities to rebuild the administrative system and the political system and the social system based on human rights concepts and values in a robust and strong way in order for us to be able to enjoy rights and liberties that are given to us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mrs. Amal. You were talking about all the different levels, be it national and even on the level of society organizations and the fragility of the state amid COVID-19 and the exacerbating situation of women, as well as the situation of women in general. Dr. Balkis was telling us how women are fragile on all levels, be it the political, the social, and the different other levels, with a focus on the political levels and the need to protect women. So, Dr. Balkis, we need to hear from you the challenge that we need to shed light on more, and what are the most important recommendations on that level. The floor is yours. Thank you, Yasmin. As you said, Yemeni women suffer from a lot of challenges, but I can highlight a few that are very important and that we want to be vocal about, and through which we can work and have the feminist Yemeni movement achieve more progress. I think the most important challenges faced by Yemeni women today are, first of all, how to protect women human rights defenders. Women human rights defenders in Yemen are still subject to a lot of breaches and attacks and criticism and bullying and cyberbullying. So women always in the society are all alone, fighting for their rights and the rights of women and the women issues. So we are in front of a disastrous situation. So we need to see how women can continue their work without being hurt and without being attacked, because there are no protective laws which make women stop doing their work. The second point is how to support the political participation of women, at least on the peace building level. The political process is still ongoing. There is a round of negotiations and consultations, etc. We need to engage women to the least in them. For example, in Stockholm, there was only one woman participating in the governmental delegation. So how can we really engage women in the political process? For example, in peace building or in reaching political consensus, because the presence of women in the political path will be reflected on all the different other paths. So women can really participate in decision making. Also, as I said, the presence of women is really scarce. The delegation from the United Nations did not really engage women as needed. When we talked about them, they were saying that they were looking for the common between the different parties in the conflict, and then they are interested in women. I think we need to focus on this, we need to work on this, and we need to know how we can have women work and participate largely. Second of all, the strategy for the resolution 1325 was launched, and if it was implemented, it can support women on all different levels. But we are still suffering and how to find financing for the entire strategy. We usually have a lot of strategy, and how to support the civil society organizations that are feminist. For example, distributing the services for women, and also in every work and actions, the men are engaged and participating or allowed to participate more than women. And this is also reflected in how the society perceives the role of women in providing services. And one of the most important cases as well is freeing the women prisoners and the women detainees in Yemen. They are imprisoned without going to court, without listening to their opinion or having a lawyer. So how can we think of laws and defend the rights of women prisoners? Because in traditional societies, those who enter the prison, they leave a big part of their lives, even if they were opinion prisoners or prisoners based on their personal convictions. So how can we really defend women human rights defenders in Yemen, especially in peace building, as I said, because the word of peace building and the concept of peace building is becoming a punishment for women. They are always punished for it. It's very hard for Yemeni women to participate and know how to participate. Thank you so much, Dr. Balqis. Now we will move to the situation in Tunisia. As Dr. Bushra was mentioning, the absence of feminist policies in the state and the domination of patriarchal rhetoric, and how this is affecting the transitional justice path. Mrs. Bushra, the floor is yours. The issue of transitional justice in Tunisia is related to the issues of women directly on the level of documentation and on the level on different levels. Today we have a lot of information, and all the information needed on the level of women's rights and gender rights. They exist with us, they are documented with the society and with the state. However, it was an opportunity, maybe a historic opportunity for Tunisians to have this equality as a path adopted by the society, and through it to maybe achieve the needs of Tunisians, to achieve, first of all, guaranteeing that impunity is not given to the perpetrators. We cannot hear you, Yasmin. Is there a problem? Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. We can hear you, Mrs. Bushra. The floor is yours. I was saying, when it comes to solutions and doing the same practices and doing the reforms that are needed, there is a collection of reforms that need to be implemented to guarantee equality. However, unfortunately, the negative point on the level of transitional justice is that, first of all, no work has been done that is connected to the society directly. The Tunisian society did not understand the issue of transitional justice as if it's only limited to the extremists and Islamists, and as if it's only limited to compensations. Because unfortunately, when the Islamists went to the rule, they failed big time. And unfortunately, the separation between the Islamists, and especially the issue of compensations, and the focus, on the other hand, on different other issues, it was not really done. And the state of Tunisia, although it has put the law on transitional justice and the committee on transitional justice, however, it did not provide it with the needed capacities and expertise. And there are so many issues and laws that were not really done, and no reconciliation has been done. No reconciliation has been done, and the state did not go into negotiations and consultations. For the 100th time, I say, unfortunately, because Tunisia had a unique experience, and it could have done a much more unique and better experience in the transitional phase. I know every country has a different unique experience, but I think personally that the experience in Tunisia was a failure, and it did not succeed in doing its objectives, although the good thing that was the documentation of human rights breaches. There was a committee specialized on this, and recommendations specifically on women's rights. I still hope that one day we will go back to this documentation and this report and all these figures and findings to go ahead into more reforms on the legislations, but the reforms of the institutions as well. And also the reforms on the level of the courts, because a big part of reforms on the level of the legal apparatus is needed, and it has not happened yet. And all we did was documentation only. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Bushra. Now, let's focus more on the level of documentation in the Sudanese case, with the increase of violence and breaches in the political protests lately. Mrs. Sulaima, if you can tell us more about the challenges that face the Sudanese women amid the latest political protests. Of course, the gender-based violence and sexual violence was always used as a way to control women. And we know the sexual violence was also used on men and on women as a threat itself, or as a practice itself, as what happened in Darfur. In different communities, because some parties have more control. However, there's a need to put a high priority for the people to reach a real democracy. We need to focus on transitional justice, but it has to have a feminist perspective. We need to take the perspective of women who survived violence and the women survivors from such acts, because the previous considerations did not really take into account the women and what they were subjected to. So this physical and emotional damage and violence against women needs to be incorporated in the recommendations. We need to focus on women as a main agenda. The protection and prevention from violence for women should be guaranteed, and the political and social and economic participation for women needs to be guaranteed in the laws and the reform and the economic reforms and policies. There's a need for prioritizing women and including them in all the different reforms in a way that women would have equal rights, especially the rural women, where the economy is lying on them, but there are no compensations for them as needed. Women who work on agriculture and provide a lot for the economy, they might simply die while they are pregnant. So we need to provide them with equal services and rights and qualifications to all what they are providing for. We need to have the political agenda to be as a priority in a way that the political participation of women to be in the best environment possible, because the access to services and in terms of prevention and protection measures, we need to remind ourselves that women are just not persons voting, they are active citizens, need to have better positioning within any within any political party or movement, not just as a decor, but to have really an effective, and to also insist on a feminist rhetoric in all the different reforms on the social, political, and social and political levels, even if we don't reach all the things that we are aiming for, but we need at least to have a grassroots feminist level going all the way bottom up to reach the ruling levels on the level of the nation. If such a rhetoric does not exist, and if such mechanisms do not exist, we will not be able to achieve anything for women. And women really deserve a lot when it comes to their day-to-day lives challenges, when it comes to protection, prevention, and dealing with the state, in addition to facing political violence every day and pay a lot of sacrifices for a transitional democracy. So it's very important for women to be at the heart of the political rhetoric. Thank you so much, Mrs. Sulaima. Now we have finished the second and the first rounds of discussion from this panel today. And now this round is for the participants with us today to ask us questions. So whoever needs to ask a question, please raise a hand on Zoom and address your question to a particular participant or particular country representative, and we would be starting to answer the questions. So please go ahead. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or please type them in the chat. Mrs. Sumaya, the floor is yours, because you are raising your hand. Samia, Mrs. Samia, not Sumaya. So, good morning, this is Samia. I'm very happy with this discussion that has given us a lot of important information. And I wanted to ask, first of all, I'd like to thank you all. And I'd like to ask Bushra and maybe all the participants, please tell us what is the priority right now in Tunisia, in Iraq, in Sudan, and in Yemen for the feminist movement or for women. What is the priority that needs to be worked on in each of these 4 countries? Thank you. Thank you so much. Mrs. Asmahan is raising her hand. Mrs. Asmahan, I think, shall we take all the questions first and then answer them, or we take a question by question? As you wish. I have a meeting at 1 sharp. So maybe you can take now more questions and then we answer. In my opinion, there's an important high issue today in Tunisia, which is to activate the law on violence against women. And because the implementation of the law is very important. The law has an important part related to prevention. And when we talk about the prevention from violence, we are talking about a lot of cultures related to gender equality and equality between men and women. And this is also meaning that the Tunisian state commits and works towards spreading the culture of human rights and gender equality. What's happening of exclusion of women on the level of the economy and what we are subject to as women activists on the political level and political violence to the extent of a threat to be killed. This all means that there is no good culture on women's rights and feminism in the Tunisian society. All of this exists and all the mechanisms that were stipulated in the law on the level of the media, the role of the media, the commitments of the media, the responsibilities of the media and media spokespersons and media institutions, and the responsibilities of the civil society and of the states, and the importance of the engagement between the civil society and the state, and the importance of clarifying the role of civil society in the state, and how the state needs to build partnership that is essential with the civil society. All of this was stipulated in relation to all the forms of violence. The real problem is the absence of a political will uh, to build a society based on gender equality. So I consider that for Tunisia, I know that priorities differ from a country to a country, but for Tunisia, I think the importance is to activate this law. And through activating this law, we would legislate the different other laws, and we would decriminalize the laws that we criminalize the laws that differentiate and discriminate between men and women. And I think because violence against women is all based on the discrimination between men and women and the discriminatory practices. So in my opinion, if the Tunisian state had a real will, it needs to activate this law through a reform on the level of the judiciary, because without reforming the judiciary, women cannot reach their rights. And a recent report on from the Association of Democratic Women shows clearly how women cannot access the justice, cannot access courts and the judiciary. And also we need to change the mentality itself to do what is needed on the level of the judiciary in Tunisia. This is, in my opinion, the priority, because through which we can reach the total reform, especially on the level of all the different laws and policies, and to make them better, because laws in Tunisia are still discriminatory. For example, on the level of the hereditary issues, there is still discrimination between men and women. Thank you so much, Mrs. Bushra. Let us take all the questions, and afterwards we can start answering them. We had now with us Mrs. Rima. The floor is yours. Good evening. Thank you so much for hosting us and for all the different initiatives that are very important. My question is about the title of the panel discussion. The title is Roadmap to Reach Equality in the MENA region. I think based on what has been said today, yes, we can really conclude some information on how to reach a feminist roadmap for the MENA region. However, I think there is a need to focus on them. What is the plan that unites us? Especially that the decline is a common thing. It applies to all the 4 different countries mentioned today.
It's just as if we are also talking about Palestine, where I exist right now. In Palestine, there's a big decline on the level of women's rights and approaches to dealing with women. The last couple of days, especially during March, we are facing an attack on the CEDAW agreement and the demand and to pressure the state to let go of the agreement. So there are people calling for this. And these are simple things, but not really only simple. There are pressures on the Palestinian state uh, to let go of the CEDAW agreement and to stop it. And I know this, all these policies that we're talking about, as much as they are applied, for example, in Egypt, they can be applied in Palestine because we have the same culture dominating and the same powers in opposition, the Salafists, the extremists. We have common components in our realities. So I'd like to hear more about this roadmap that you are talking about in the title of the panel discussion. Mrs. Asmahan, the floor is yours. Greetings all. This is Asma from Yemen, from Sana'a. I'm an activist and a lawyer. I'd like to answer the question of the needs of women in the Arab states. I want to say, to add more about the discriminatory laws and the participation of women. In Yemen, there are some problems faced by women, and all of these challenges, they are present. And it's a result of the ongoing conflict and the difficulty for women to reach judicial mechanisms. And gender-based violence is increased, and sexual violence and physical violence are all among the biggest challenges faced by women in Yemen. We are enduring siege that is very harsh, and this is affecting women's access to resources, to food, to health care. And this is affecting women largely and contributing to further poverty by women. Women are also facing climate change repercussions and a lot of disasters and floods. Lately, we have floods and a lot of lack of water for drinking. This is all affecting the livelihood access of women and their access to a dignified living. Having women in the roadmap in the title, I think the title should be how to reach food security and peace for women. And I hope to have much more titles to empower women in these areas where conflicts are ongoing. Thank you so much, Mrs. Asmahan. As you mentioned, as you asked, and as Mrs. Rima mentioned, we are talking about a feminist roadmap on the regional level, and this is why we are meeting today, and also why we're meeting on the 28th of Feb and on March 1st. Previously, we met on these two occasions, and we talked about how to set a roadmap that is feminist and regional, because the issues of women are intersectional, especially in our region, and perhaps the discussants can answer the questions. And also we have more questions in the chat. A participant is asking and saying that the pandemic has shown the vulnerability of women and girls around the world, and that learning how can unite globally to share what we are doing through in a safe space and public formats, and to understand women in a regional lens and also in an international lens, because it's a common It's a common struggle. I think no one else is raising their hand, so I'll give the floor to Mrs. Sulaima. I wanted to answer on the fact that the roadmap includes a lot of common elements in the region. This is not only unique to the Arab region, but it's also unique to the African region. From North Africa to the Middle East, there are so many common elements, but the essential thing in this roadmap is to have a feminist movement that is regional and that is pushing forth for changing policies, and that would be stronger. Would be pushing forth for policies on the level of regional institutions like the League of Arab States, the African Union, the European Union, that is affecting policies and decisions here and there, and affecting the decisions of the United Nations. We need to have a regional feminist institution away from the formal sector that would tackle the most important and pressing issues of women. The second thing that we all share is the importance of changing social norms and replacing them with social norms that are friendly to women and more concerned and sensitive to women's issues, because everything that affects women badly is related to the social norms in our societies. And in Africa, we have societies and communities where these norms are dominating and women are oppressed and they don't have access to all these rights. So we can also benefit from the Tunisian experience and how we can adopt feminist issues as a lesson learned from the previous experience. It's also about how to guide each other in Tunisia as well, and to have policies that are directed to women and that are included in all the sectors for women, and to have the political rhetoric on the top of women's issues. If the feminist issues were not accompanied by a political rhetoric, it cannot be part of the competition for even reaching the power and the rule. It's, I mean, the good competition and not the bad competition. Thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to have any intervention? Thank you. If I may, yes, the floor is yours. In Iraq, and as part of the feminist movement in Iraq, part of our priorities now that we are working on is legislating domestic violence law. It's part of our priorities that we want to work on. And we are hoping in the next session of the parliament to have it legislated, also to enforce the role of women, to be in safe spaces, and to reflect the outputs of the agenda on the reality of women. There's a need to have a governmental vision that would help women for a safe and voluntary return, to provide good infrastructure to include women in the developmental process. I think all of these are part of our priorities, in addition, of course, to finding a feminist institution on the national level that works under a comprehensive national vision on women's rights in general. Thank you. Dr. Balqis, the floor is yours. Thank you, Yasmin. I just want to shed light on the states that are under conflicts. I know the different issues that we face are diverse. I just want to add my voice to Asmahan's voice, that there are so many challenges facing Yemeni women, and they are all priorities: starvation, violence,
poverty, and it's exacerbating. All these are priorities that we all share as countries under conflicts. But I want to say that from the priorities, there's also the importance of to know how to protect women and their human rights, and to engage them in peace building, because raising their voices would solve all the issues. The second priority, I think, and the second point is another important priority, which is the economic priority, how to assist women in small and medium enterprises and more small projects to make ends meet and to work. And the economic situation is still dominating, and it has led a lot of women to go make ends meet. So we have a lot of common things in the conflict affected countries, and this roadmap for a feminist movement, I think that its intersectionalities is peace building and fighting violence, fighting starvation, especially in the conflict affected areas like Yemen and Syria. Thank you so much.
شكرا لحضرتك يا
Thank you.
دكتورة بلقيس. في سؤال كمان جالنا إن
There's another question that we received.
الخناق في العراق ازدادت حالات الانتحار والإتجار.
In Iraq, the cases of human trafficking and suicide are increasing, in addition to the decline in the economic situation, especially for working women on a daily rate, and those with a limited allowance, which has led to further violence on the domestic violence level and violence against women in particular. At the end, I just want to mention that on the regional level, we are trying to, as part of this panel discussion, we aim to reach the common objectives and to reach a roadmap on the regional level, reaching the international level with respecting at the same time the cultural components of each country and priorities of each country. And as Mrs. Amal and Bushra have mentioned, and we're trying to understand how we are benefiting from different experiences from a country to another, be it on the level of documentation or the transitional justice path or the conflict affected areas, and how to move from national efforts to civil society efforts and feminist events, and how to push forward to reach better solutions, especially in the latest phase where we are facing a lot of conflicts in the MENA region. And at the end, does anyone want to have the last intervention for today before we conclude the meeting?
طيب هو كده يعتبر مفيش
I think since we don't have any further questions addressed to the panelists, I'd like to thank you all so much for this great meeting. Thank you for Nazra for Feminist Studies, and thank you for CRTDA, and thank you for all the interventions today. I'm facing some technical problems, but I was just saying thank you for Nazra in cooperation with CRTDA, which is the Collective for Research and Training on Development Actions. I thank you all very much for this great meeting and for all these interventions. Thank you for all the participations with us today, and I hope that the meeting does not stop here. It's a cycle, it's a series of meetings that will be that was organized before. It was a series of meetings that we previously had, and they are all addressing the CSW. So thank you so much, everyone, and I wish you a great day. Thank you.
شكرا لكم، يعطيكم العافية. Thank you.
شكرا.